Excellent. One of my favorite topics. And please, if you have questions throughout the presentation, please don't hesitate to submit in the Q&A. We will address them at the end of the presentation. So lots to cover today. As Rita mentioned, we'll be covering a bit of the China social landscape, giving you an overview of the different social media platforms that are really important with KOLs, particularly for beauty brands and consumer products. I'll touch on some very fresh trends in China KOL marketing, and then actually demonstrate how we use data and analytics to do planning for marketing. So by way of background, I basically have spent most of my career helping brands do strategy and with the insights of data to make those decisions. I think as a business owner, whether you're on the marketing team or the product team, you have a lot of research and information required to make decisions on how do I grow in a new market, how do I enter the market, and how do I continue to expand. And at the core of it, what we do at Launchmetrics is have a very holistic view, whether it's looking at what celebrities are doing for a brand, what print or online media is impacting the awareness and growth for a brand. And today's conversation is purely focused on KOLs, also known as influencers, key opinion leaders. So as you think about China marketing strategies, KOL, when I started back in 2010, 2011, was literally a single-digit percentage of a brand's marketing budget. And you fast forward, over 10 years later, for some brands, it's 50+% of how they allocate for building awareness and driving conversion through to purchase. So in the context of all of the activities that impact what makes KOL marketing successful, it's important to know that many companies and brands are also investing in partners. So partners would be your retail partners. In the case of a lot of beauty brands, it actually is, say, travel retail partners, right? And the duty-free retailers and such. And then you also have your owned social media accounts. So your brand's owned WeChat account or Weibo account. So this voice approach is how we think about how do you help a brand grow in the market. And so today we'll deep dive in just to one aspect, which is the KOL part. And what does that mean? In terms of understanding and knowing. In order to even measure how a brand is growing in China, we actually track hundreds of thousands of accounts. In the case of the top social media platforms in China, we'll track over 60,000 accounts on Weibo, almost 90,000 on Red and Douyin, as well as WeChat and Bilibili accounts. And so I'll go and explain what exactly those platforms are. And why this matters. If you take anything away from today's webinar, please understand this. The Chinese consumer experiences 8 touch points with a brand before purchasing. This is compared to 4 touch points for US consumers. So what does this mean exactly? Nowadays, we're familiar with the concept of seeing content on TikTok, and then, or on Douyin, and then maybe doing some research. In markets outside of China, you have the whole Facebook, Instagram ecosystem where you can have content retargeted back to a consumer. In China, that's much more difficult with the lack of data sharing between Tencent, Alibaba, ByteDance, and Baidu. So it means that in order to reach the consumer, it requires many more, a much more comprehensive presence. So this is just to visualize what that means. So on the left here, we have, these are all pieces of content that actually have Chanel beauty products, right? So one is a tutorial on Douyin. The second one is a product review on Little Red Book, or I'll call Red, Xiaohongshu. And in the middle, we have Weibo, where someone has, a KOL has gone to a Chanel event, is posting photos from that offline event experience. And then in the second to the right, we have content and product tutorials on Bilibili, which is very much like a YouTube of China. And then on the very end, on the right, we have an example of like a live streaming by one of the most famous live streamers, Austin Li Jiaqi. And so as you can see, the consumer on average sees 8 points of contact before coming to purchase. So some of this is by discovery, some of this is by their own research. And just to put it in perspective, not all apps are created equal, and it's not even necessarily about the total number of users on any given app. It's the purpose of the app that matters. So here, just to give you a sense, yes, WeChat is the most actively used application because it touches everything from hailing taxis to ordering food to payments. So yes, it has over 1.2 billion users. And then you can see for Douyin, there's 700 million monthly active users in China. Right, this is a huge number. And then that compares to Red, Xiaohongshu, which has 200 million active users. But again, depending on your objectives and your audience in terms of who is your target customer, it's not so much about how many total users are in an app, but how many of your total target audience is on the app. And I bring this up because Douyin, which has the most screen time and eyeball attention as compared to most of the apps where the average user is spending almost an hour and a half per day, compared to Red, where it's a much smaller reach of 200 million, but it's a very important part of the discovery and research process for consumer fashion and luxury beauty brands. So just to give you an idea, a top tier KOL on Douyin. So a top tier KOL meaning over 5 million followers. They may charge, say, I mean, this is approximation, 150,000 RMB, which is roughly over 20,000 US for a video post. And comparing that to a top tier KOL on Red, right, which would be maybe over 500,000. So we're talking the difference between 5 million plus followers or 500,000 followers, and a top tier KOL on Red might charge the same amount, also 150,000 RMB or roughly over 20, purchasing 25,000 US. So just to give you an idea, it's not necessarily sheer numbers, but the importance and influence of a particular app. And so that if you have more questions on pricing and stuff like that, happy to share in more detail later after the webinar. So continuing on about these actual apps and what they do and why how the content is important for KOLs. WeChat is that super app where the real opportunities on it are about engaging in particular with one, KOL's community that they actually manage directly on the app. So a lot of most successful KOLs will actually have private group WeChat groups with hundreds or thousands of their, I would call it VIP or A++ fans and followers. So in the same way, just like whether I'm doing a live stream on Taobao or I'm going to post my new content on Bilibili, I might have my super fans in a private WeChat group. And that's where I'm able to distribute and alert them to know that I have new content available, right? So WeChat itself, as a brand, is where a lot of brands need to have an official account that becomes your whole customer interface, your WeChat e-commerce, all of that happens there. But the most important aspect when it comes to KOL marketing with WeChat is, one, it's a way for the KOLs themselves to directly reach their fans. And likewise, that's a way as a brand to engage with those communities as part of when you think about how that collaboration extends. It's not just about, okay, make a post, make a video and post on Douyin. When you think about your KOL marketing strategy, how is it you can actually directly connect with the KOL's fans and always ask them, do you have, WeChat fan groups? And so this is an important thing to keep in mind. Generally speaking, the disadvantages of WeChat is that it's pretty low virality. Content on WeChat doesn't have not nearly as much of a recommendation algorithm the way the other social apps operate. So for a lot of brands, it is very much a place for engaging with existing customers or people who already come into the funnel, who are already following your brand on WeChat, et cetera. So just to give you some examples, these both in the fashion and beauty arena, WeChat is very much a way for KOLs to create a bit, although they've expanded into video and live content, its core is still very much in the text-based driven content and the sharing of moments. So then we have Douyin, which I guess many of you would probably be quite familiar with TikTok, and it is very much an app that is highly popular with Gen Z, but it's gone beyond just Gen Z. I would say it's probably very much millennial as well. And the traffic from Douyin to e-commerce was so significant that the app eventually created its own e-commerce system marketplace instead of directing all traffic to Tmall, to Taobao. And so this is something not to be underestimated. They'll continue as a platform to invest in growing the connection between the social content that creators and KOLs are making and allowing and enabling the audience to become consumers through the app. There is a whole system on Douyin itself where brands can see KOLs and engage them in campaigns. You can see a lot of data about any sort of e-commerce related statistics. So for example, you can look up a KOL and see which other like price points they've promoted, kind of some historical performance when it came to certain products. This spans across multiple industries, whether it's food and beverage, restaurants, beauty. Actually, interestingly enough, there are a lot of, there's a virtual beauty KOL I'll mention a bit later in the presentation, who grew, 30 million followers in one night, and it wasn't even an actual KOL, it was an animated KOL. So again, something to realize that the virality and speed at which KOLs can grow on this platform is incredible. And, just as a reminder, because there's 700 million monthly active users on this app, the threshold to be a mid-tier KOL would be 1 million plus followers, and it would be 5 million plus to be top tier, to give you an example. So the content here is definitely entertainment driven, but increasingly the people are finding ways to bring more like product marketing to it. And so at the moment, it is very much entertainment focused, and it's increasingly used by most. If you look at the brand usage of Douyin, it's still in the early stages, I would say. And here's some examples of, on the right, we have Midnight Teacher Shu, who is just walking through a collection of clothing and doing styling. And then on the left and then on the right, we have a whole makeup tutorial that's being experienced here. Then we have Weibo, which has been around the longest of the platforms. It's very much where people are going for news and latest content to follow celebrities. Most brands have official accounts here. It's very much a pay to play. So virality is very much, getting posts boosted through the system. And it's particularly important when you're working with KOLs and celebrities. It's not always the strongest way in terms of building brand presence. But that being said, it is an important aspect for certain cohorts, maybe less so for Gen Z. And then we have Red, which about 80+% of the users are female. So it is a very specific but highly influential platform. Most fashion and beauty brands are investing heavily in the app, both along the spectrum of key opinion consumers as well as top tier KOLs. So it's very much an app where if you're trying to reach female consumers 18 to 35 to 40, this is very much an app where people go to, research shopping lists, product comparisons, And it very much functions with social search optimization, which I'll talk in a bit of detail later. So here again, some examples of some top read KOLs. And then we have Bilibili, which is, I guess, is kind of similar to YouTube. It's important to understand that the community of Bilibili started with a very anime, cartoon, graphic novel user base, which has now grown up and become a highly important Gen Z user. It's the coolest aspect of Bilibili is that the users and audience, as they're writing comments, those comments will stream across the content so that the creator can actually read those in real time, react in real time. It's a very engaging experience that's very unique to China social. And here you have some examples. Again, Bilibili, although it's the newest, was, if you looked at some of the very innovative brands, even like the big luxury houses like Dior, they were kind of the first to create an official account Bilibili because they recognized that this was kind of that next gen of consumer and the way to tap into Gen Z in China. And one of the most fascinating platforms is Weitao or Guangguang or the different live streaming apps for Tmall and Taobao. This kicked off a few years ago where there was a very concerted effort to have a whole tens of thousands of live streamers and creators for e-commerce. And it is a very fascinating ecosystem where it's probably like 90-10, where the top 10% probably drive 90% of the traffic and conversion. And so currently we're tracking a few thousand accounts on Weitao here, and it's very much commercial. Unlike the other platforms where the KOL content is geared to building trust. It's not that Weitao live streaming isn't, but it is when the user and the audience is there, they are expecting to be sold. And so that's part of shopping as the entertainment experience in that case. And again, as you can see, here's an example of Austin Lee. There've been some really interesting collaborations with him that I'll show in the kind of remaining slides. So let's cover some interesting trends. I wish this was an interactive webinar. I'd love to pause for questions. And one of the interesting things we've been observing, and to be honest, I dismissed this. Like when this came out a few years ago, I was like, there's no way this will happen, but it did. I would say AI influencers and virtual brand ambassadors are something that brands are experimenting with. So on the left here, we have Liu Yeshi. She's a Douyin virtual beauty KOL. And so within 30 hours of her first video, she attracted over 1 million followers. And what her content is she's going through a whole drama series of chasing demons, and each video episode, she features different looks by different beauty brands. So again, you have this intersection between pure entertainment with sponsored content. And so just so you understand, we have these kind of tags here in the green circles called MIV, which is media impact value. And so I've been remiss in explaining media impact value. Media impact value is a system that we've developed at Launchmetrics, which assigns a monetary value to every video post, WeChat article, print, media mention, et cetera. And what does that mean exactly? It means that we assess over 20 attributes. So some of them are quantitative, some of them are qualitative. The quantitative attributes are, okay, how many likes and comments does this post get? Other quantitative aspects are, what does it cost to reach 1,000 people? So sort of like, what's the CPM? What does it cost to reach 1,000 eyeballs on Douyin versus Red, right? What is the difference between having, what is the value of a like or comment on Instagram versus Bilibili? So basically is a benchmarking formula to assign value to each post and article that mentions a brand. And what this allows us to do is actually, and you'll see, visualize it in the coming slides, is allows us to understand what's working for brands, what's not working, And more importantly, if you're thinking about how do I succeed at KOL marketing, what do I need to achieve in order to hit a certain level of growth, or approach the awareness of my next best competitor, or who you aspire to be as a brand. So I think this is a really important benchmarking metric that I'll kind of show some more examples to help you understand that better. So then back to this trend of AI influencers and virtual brand ambassadors. The second one here is a virtual celebrity singer, Luotini. She has tens of millions of followers, and she's actually co-hosting a live stream for L'Occitane with Austin Lee. And so here you have the top beauty influencer with the top virtual celebrity singer, and they're selling a kind of a new package of products by L'Occitane. So just to give you the idea, the kind of experimentation happening here. And then the other two examples on this side are examples of what I call like in-house KOLs, or in-house brand ambassadors. So there are virtual avatars and characters created by the brand that embody the brand's DNA, and they themselves have their own social accounts. They can engage with fans. And this is in the case of Florasis, which is a highly successful Chinese domestic beauty brand. They have a brand ambassador here that embodies, traditional Chinese beauty aesthetics, and has their own accounts and engages with consumers. And on the far right here, we have Mr. O, who's L'Oreal's in-house ambassador. He's a 24-year-old Chinese-French beauty entrepreneur. And so he talks about sustainability and new product development, and, appeals to that particular demographic that they're looking to reach. Other things we're seeing, given with COVID and limitations on travel outside of China, a lot of experimentation and innovation has been happening, particularly with travel retail. So in this example, it's a virtual travel retail experience where KOLs are actually part of this virtual experience. So as the consumer enters this high-end duty-free retail concept, they meet the virtual host, who then leads them to explore some very science-based information about the product and formulation. And then the consumer goes through an interactive questionnaire, and they can actually walk through an exhibition hall where they see different KOLs and the products that these KOLs are recommending. So in this example, the KOLs themselves are inviting their fans to experience this virtual retail, which then ends with a call to action to then place orders and do click and collect with Sheila Travel Retail. Not necessarily KOL specific, but I did want to mention that some brands are doing work with NFTs and bundling like products with NFTs, particularly during big promotional efforts, such as like Singles Day. So in this Double 11 campaign that happened last year, there were, there was a virtual symphony conducted by a virtual Beethoven, and each of the instruments were sponsored by different brands. In this case, anything from Bobby Brown to Coca-Cola to Guerlain sponsored these virtual musical instruments as part of this campaign. And this has been an ongoing trend, particularly on the platform Red, is how do brands increase and improve their discovery on the app? And it's all about understanding the algorithms behind social search optimization, which means you working with and collaborating with KOLs in very specific ways. So what I mean by that is brands who are really taking the social search approach, optimizing that on a regular basis, whether it's could be monthly, could be biweekly, are looking at what are the keywords that they want their brand to rank for. Just like when you look at Google and you decide, okay, these Google search words are where I want my brand or website to appear. Same way here on the app. So if I'm looking for matte lipstick or something, do I want my brand to appear in the top 5 results, the top 20 results, et cetera? So having a very keyword search approach to red is how brands are utilizing working with whether it's top tier KOLs or KOC. So a KOC is a key opinion consumer. So we're talking about a creator or micro influencer who has less than 50,000 followers on the platform. So on the right side here, I have an example of a KOC, has 40,000 followers, what that means in terms of MIV, a couple thousand, and how that compares to a top tier KOL who has over 1 million followers, what that kind of MIV, media impact value, is generated from their content. And you can sort of see the difference. And it's kind of surprising. You're like, well, why is this top tier KOL so much more impactful in terms of comments, likes, and favorites versus a micro KOL? Sorry, why aren't the numbers higher considering it's 1.3 million versus 39,000? And again, I think it's important to understand that the way the traffic and the way that the app recommends content to users does tend to favor smaller accounts. And so this is why brands do work with hundreds or thousands of KOCs to make sure that their content, whether it's tutorials, product reviews, user experiences, are with KOCs and not just top tier KOLs. Bear in mind and keep in mind that I just realized I'm quickly running out of time and I need to move quite quickly through these slides. So I'm gonna move quickly. I'm gonna do the main highlights. We have a lot of ground to cover in today's presentation. So another big trend we have is key opinion consumers. So this was a really interesting campaign that was done with MAC Cosmetics on Douyin. They did a contest with 11 of their beauty associates who then could see who could sell the most in a month. And what was amazing about it is the top contest winner, they grew their fans by 300,000 in that period of time. They generated almost 1 million in sales. And this kind of campaign and collaboration was both successful on the brand building awareness side as well as on the commercial side. So let's understand, how do you figure out what will work for your brand? And I'm going to explain this concept again, because you really have to to appreciate how we use data, understand what are the metrics behind it. So as I mentioned, media impact value takes both quantitative and qualitative attributes. Quantitative attributes are, could be all the engagement numbers for a post, article, video. It's how active that KOL is for a particular category. Qualitative is a system where we've measured what is, for example, the source authority. So let's say if your product is pet food, it's less important for you if someone who is an expert on cosmetics, if they don't own a pet. So in terms of their source authority, they would have a lower weight in MIV for you versus another brand. So ultimately, MIV allows your brand to assign a monetary value to every post, interaction, or article. And by doing so, allows you to benchmark and figure out where you should be investing. And so let's visualize this. What does this actually mean? So here's an example on Bilibili itself. So here I have these two top tier, I don't know why I'm suddenly coughing. Top tier KOLs with over 500,000 followers. And then you have the example of a celebrity ambassador who actually has 25,000, an interview of a celebrity ambassador that's posted on the brand's owned account itself. And so, as you can see, the MIV is similar, but their follower count is quite different. So this is giving you an idea of how the weighting works. It's not so much about the total followers that, is the driving weight for MIV, but in this example, you can see that the views, likes, and comments, over roughly 250,000 views, 30,000 likes, over 1,000 comments are quite similar. And so that's what's sort of driving the benchmarking across these two video posts on Bilibili. So when we think about MIV and then we apply it to a group or competitor list of brands. So in this case, we picked a range of predominantly skincare brands, and we looked at a period of time. So in this case, it's March through May. And we're like, so what is their MIV across influencers and celebrity? And what does that mean in terms of the number of, when we say placements, we basically mean posts, right? So if I'm in this example, Jurlique, which is, and again, this is just a selection of brands. It's not a full list of skincare brands by any means. If I'm Jurlique and I want to grow from the 10th ranking to say the 8th ranking, where pharmacy is now, I can see that pharmacy has double the number of posts about their brand versus my brand. And what's interesting about the work we've done in China in particular is when we look at MIV, we also look at the correlation to Tmall sales, right? And there's not necessarily a direct relationship, meaning like the more posts are made, the more Tmall sales are made. But what we do see is the more MIV there is, like that year-over-year growth in MIV is very much what drives traffic and also sales on through e-commerce. So again, it varies by brand. It obviously depends on the product category. Like we looked at MIV relationship with, say, diaper products, and people buy diapers regardless of whether a KOL talks about them or not. And so it does have a strong leaning for discretionary consumer products. And so this is something to keep in mind that, it's not so much the dollar value itself that's important, but the relative amount compared to other brands, basically peers and competitors. As you think about it. So when we're working with brands and they're trying to figure out how much should I be investing in KOL marketing, right? This becomes one of the first things we look at, which is, okay, so for your product category, and you look at similar brands or products, and it doesn't have to be the same product. It could be brands of the similar customer profile. And you can see, okay, in a given year, how many KOLs are talking about that brand? And there is always, the more awareness there is of a brand in market, it usually means more sales volume. And so when you're trying to do this research and understanding, we always look at brands that are newer to the China market, maybe launched in the last 3 years, and comparing to more established brands to understand, what does your marketing plan look like? Because this allows you to do basically high-level planning and budgeting for KOL marketing. Because before you can even get into the questions of which KOL should I work with, which ones, which platforms, and how much I should be paying them, the first question is, what are your business objectives, and where do you want to see progress with your brand in the China market? And that's where we start with this competitor benchmarking to understand, okay, a brand that's not yet launched in the market, what is the current awareness with KOLs? And it's not uncommon to see, I would say, usually under 100, placements, for example, in a given year. This is not a full year of data. So if you can imagine, you take these numbers and multiply by 4 to think about on an annualized basis. Another thing we look at in terms of understanding how can I grow my brand, or where do I want it to grow, is, we call this the unofficial name, the bubble chart, which is the KOL community snapshot. And the size of the bubble is media impact value. And the horizontal axis from left to right is the number of posts per KOL. So basically, it's an indicator of loyalty, advocacy, frequency of how often a KOL on average is talking about a brand. So the objective as a brand is to always be in the upper right-hand corner, because the vertical axis is the number of KOLs. So the more KOLs in your community, the more often they're talking about you. That means the more organic buzz there is. So usually what we commonly see for new brands in market, or new brands who are spending heavily in new customer acquisition, they may only have a lower posting frequency per KOL. And so they'll be kind of more on the left side of the chart. So in this example here, you can see that certain brands are doing better. So from the prior period to going forward in terms of this 3-month sequential period. So December to February, and then that kind of March to May period. I would say the most interesting one here is probably, let's say, like Shiseido and Clarins have grown MIV the most and kind of shifted further up. And in terms of the most dramatic, it looks like La Roche-Posay is also, in terms of advocacy, has really increased over that period. So by looking at these charts, when you consider who you go head to head with in the China market, it's a great way of identifying the winners, right? So we can look at this data over year-over-year period, quarter to quarter, and really once we understand who's performing better with KOLs, then we can dive into what exactly is the strategies that they're doing. So as I mentioned in the example before, and this chart here, we could see that certain brands had been improving their MIV and increasing their KOL advocacy stronger than others. And one of them was La Roche-Posay, which it seems to have a very strong, at the top here is their owned media. That's a yellow chart. So that's their own social accounts. The orange color is KOL, right? So they have a bit more of a balanced approach where they're really strong in their owned media in addition to their influencer collaborations. And as you can see, all these brands, it's 70+% of the MIV mentions. So if we look at a newer brand to market in China, such as Eve Lom, they're kind of a bit more focused on media and influencer, which is KOL. They haven't really done anything with celebrities. And so this will be a trend as we continue going to the slides. Another question is people are always asking, which types of KOL should I work with? What tiers? And so this really kind of shows that breakdown, right? So the darker color is that all-star influencer of 2 million plus followers, and that gradient down to the lighter color is the micro influencers of less than 100,000. So as you can see, there's not one way to do this well. Some of these brands do very well, but have very different strategies. So in the case of La Roche-Posay, you can see they've really put a lot in the all-star or the highest tier of influencers, but others such as Clarins, which have, although it's increased as MIV and KOL advocacy, they're much more balanced and they're putting a lot with the mid-tier influencers. And again, this is just helping visualize like the total MIV and sort of the difference. And this is mostly reflective of, it gives you some indication of marketing budget size as well. Not all KOL mentions are, of course, sponsored. I would say probably only 20, 25, 30%. The rest are somewhat organic. And so this is giving an idea. Again, when you're thinking about planning, a lot of the brands that we're working with, you know, the main aspect is, okay, if I want to grow in China, I have to invest in the market. The question is how much? And so when you're able to look at this kind of data, you can sit back and say, okay, this brand is doing this amount of Tmall sales, and they're working with 1,000 KOLs in a given year. And it gives you an idea of what that investment might look like. This is one of my favorite charts, which is understanding which platforms to work on. And this varies dramatically. So if I were to pull up this chart for Chinese domestic brands like Fluorasis and Perfect Diary, they're very, very heavy on Douyin and very increasingly heavy, not heavy, but increasing in their investment on Bilibili, which here, Bilibili is, you can barely see it. It's the darker pink at the top of the charts. You can see it a bit in Shiseido, for example. So from this spectrum of brands, red for some varies from 30 to 40% of the media impact value by KOLs. As you can see, Douyin also has a very different emphasis. So La Roche-Posay, which I mentioned, really demonstrated significant, quarter-over-quarter growth. They're doing a lot on Douyin platform itself. And so again, my word of caution is when you're understanding how other brands are performing, it's important to also ask the question, not just how direct competitors are doing, but also just the most digitally innovative brands. And oftentimes that's going to be the Chinese domestic brands, They're reacting much closer to market. Their planning cycles are much faster. They don't have to go through planning cycles with a global headquarters somewhere else. And so it's always important to understand what are the Chinese domestic brands doing. And that's where you'll see the most variation in terms of channel mix, KOL mix strategies happening. And I have 3 minutes until I break for Q&A. So just to give you an idea of what all this involves, here's an example of a Chinese domestic brand, Perfect Diary. They had a whole gift box set that they did for Chinese Valentine's for Wu Arling. And so this particular challenge, they had different KOL couples sharing love stories and romantic anniversaries with a specific hashtag challenge. So this had over 300 million views. And what was interesting, they didn't work with just beauty KOLs. They worked with anime, comedy, couples accounts. So it was very much a broad range and it involved over 1,000 KOLs posting and over 1 billion points of engagement for this particular campaign. So just to give you an idea, I talked about how these different brands, had MIV mentions on the platforms. And so this is, again, it's not always about thousands. So here just on Bilibili itself for these skincare brands, just to show you the difference, Shiseido only had like 35 placements on Bilibili for this 3-month period. And La Roche-Posay had 17, just to give you an idea. So some of these experimentations on newer platforms doesn't necessarily mean like working with hundreds of KOLs, but it's certainly something to keep in mind as you're planning. And then you compare this to like Douyin, where it's more in like the hundreds for brands that are actually working with KOLs proactively. So there's both organic and sponsored mentions here. And to give you an idea, like what do these like collaborations look like? There's makeup tutorials. There's on Bilibili, there's also a whole like choose your own adventure plots, stories done with the creators and different makeup challenges. Again, so these are content ideas to consider when you're working with KOLs. So it can be like dramatic product testing, interactive videos. There's this trend towards like de-stressing, especially in the last couple of years with COVID. So this is very much to give you some examples of what kinds of content that brands are working with these KOLs. So in summary, we're seeing that digitally innovative brands are investing with Bilibili and Douyin KOLs. Other brands are very much taking that owned media strategy approach and working with virtual KOLs or brand ambassadors that are in-house, or even working with key opinion sellers. So working with beauty associates and the people who know your product best in market. When it comes to working with red KOLs, you have a very social search optimization strategy where you have keywords that you want to include in their content briefs so that you're making sure that your brand ranks for certain attributes. And I didn't get a chance to touch on today's presentation, but it is a phenomenon globally. And I would be remiss not to mention that value-driven marketing continues to gain traction, particularly when you're working with KOLs. So things like sustainability or pride for Chinese brands, known as Guochao, and women's empowerment continue to be important content aspects for working with KOLs. And with that, I will open up for Q&A.